Imagine opening a folder marked top secret, expecting to find modern military intelligence, but instead finding ancient Hebrew poetry. If you strip away the centuries of liturgical tradition and look at the text through the cold, analytical lens of strategic planning, what do you actually see? Today, we are doing exactly that. We are taking Psalms 75 through 79 and putting them through a rigorous corporate and geopolitical audit. We are talking SWOT, pestle, spear, and even game theory.
It is a fascinating exercise because these 5 chapters read less like a quiet devotional and more like a crisis management portfolio. You have everything from victory declarations and national defense strategies to psychological collapse and post-disaster recovery. When you look at them together, they outline a highly volatile relationship between a sovereign authority and a client state.
Let's start with the big picture, the baseline of this entire portfolio. If we were to run a SWOT analysis on the geopolitical entity of Israel as presented in these chapters, what stands out as the primary strength?
The primary strength is clearly defined in Psalms 75 and 76. It is an asymmetric asset. In modern terms, we would call it an absolute defense guarantee. The text describes a sovereign protector who controls the global coordinate system, someone who can raise up one leader and bring down another. In Psalm 76, this protector breaks the flashing arrows, the shields, the swords, and the weapons of war. From a strategic standpoint, having an invincible, non-physical ally is the ultimate force multiplier. It is a strength that completely nullifies the conventional military superiority of neighboring empires.
But that strength comes with a massive built-in weakness, doesn't it? If your entire national security strategy relies on a single, highly demanding ally, your vulnerability is compliance.
Exactly. The weakness is internal alignment. The SWOT analysis shows a critical vulnerability in the human element. The client state suffers from chronic operational drift and cognitive dissonance. We see this detailed extensively in Psalm 78, which is essentially a historical audit of human failure. The people repeatedly forget the past interventions, lose focus on the core mission, and violate the terms of the agreement. So, their greatest strength is entirely contingent on a condition they consistently fail to meet.
That brings us to the opportunities and threats. The threat landscape is obvious. You have hostile regional powers, physical destruction of infrastructure, and cultural assimilation. But what about the opportunities?
The opportunity is always realignment. In every crisis depicted in these chapters, particularly the deep grief of Psalm 77 and the absolute ruin of Psalm 79, there is an open window for strategic pivot. The opportunity lies in leveraging historical data, remembering the miracles of the past, like the Exodus to restore the alliance. It is a classic recovery strategy. Acknowledge the failure, realign with the sovereign partner, and trigger the defense clause once again.
Let's layer a pestle analysis over this to understand the environment. If we look at the political, social, and legal factors, the tension becomes even clearer. Politically, we see a transition from a decentralized tribal system to a centralized monarchy, culminating in the choice of David in Psalm 78. Socially, there is a massive generational risk. The older generation is failing to transmit the organizational memory to the younger generation.
That social aspect is crucial. When a society fails to pass down its core values, the legal framework, the covenant, in this case collapses. The legal dimension here isn't just about rules. It is the binding contract that dictates the survival of the state. When the social transmission fails, the legal obligations are ignored, which immediately triggers the political and military consequences we see in Psalm 79, where Jerusalem is reduced to rubble.
It is a devastating cycle. And when you look at it through a spear analysis, focusing on the social, political, economic, actionable, and resource sectors, the immediate actionable steps in a crisis change drastically. In Psalm 77, the writer is in a state of personal and national depression. The actionable step isn't to build more chariots. The resources are depleted. The actionable step is psychological resilience. It is a mental shift from panic to recollection.
Yes, the author explicitly says, I will appeal to this, to the years of the right hand of the Most High. That is a deliberate cognitive strategy. When your physical resources are zero, your only remaining resource is historical precedent and mental endurance.
It is about maintaining operational continuity when everything around you is falling apart. And speaking of deep dives into complex, high-stakes scenarios, we want to take a quick moment to tell you about a show that shares our passion for dissecting complex narratives.
The New Sentinel is a podcast dedicated to providing in-depth discussions and deep dives into a wide array of topics. From the glitz and glamour of pop culture to the strategic intricacies of military operations, they cover it all.
Each episode is thoughtfully crafted to offer listeners a comprehensive understanding of the subject matter, featuring expert interviews, detailed analysis, and engaging storytelling.
Whether you are a pop culture enthusiast or someone with a keen interest in global security, the New Sentinel has something for everyone.
Tune in, view, subscribe, comment, and post an inquiry to stay informed and entertained. It is the perfect companion for minds that like to look beneath the surface. Now, let's get back to our strategic breakdown.
We were talking about operational continuity, and that leads us directly to game theory. If we model the relationship in these psalms as a strategic game between two players, player 1 being the divine sovereign and player 2 being the nation, the payoffs and decisions become highly logical.
Right. In classical game theory, we look at rational choices, but at first glance, the human player looks completely irrational. In Psalm 78, they witness incredible interventions, plagues in Egypt, the parting of the sea, water from a rock, and yet they immediately defect. They disobey. Why would a rational actor choose a path that guarantees punishment?
It comes down to short-term versus long-term payoffs, and what economists call hyperbolic discounting. The human player value immediate, tangible payoffs like physical food in the wilderness or political alliances with local nations more than the long-term, abstract promise of covenant security. The immediate temptation to defect yields a perceived short-term utility. They choose to test the sovereign, hoping they can get the short-term benefit without triggering the penalty.
But the sovereign player is playing a repeated game, not a one-shot game. In a repeated game, the dominant strategy changes.
Exactly. The sovereign player uses a modified tit-for-tat strategy, but with a high capacity for mercy. When the human player defects, the sovereign punishes to maintain the credibility of the rules. If there is no punishment, the covenant loses all value. But the sovereign also recognizes that if they wipe out the human player, the game ends. And the sovereign's long-term mission requires the game to continue. So, the sovereign repeatedly forgives, resetting the game state. It is a fascinating loop of defection, punishment, reconciliation, and reset.
And we see the ultimate justification for the sovereign's decisions in the transition at the end of Psalm 78. The decision to reject the northern tribes and choose Judah, and specifically to choose David as shepherd, is a major strategic realignment. The sovereign player changes the leadership structure to mitigate the human player's tendency to defect. It is an institutional fix to a behavioral problem.
That is a brilliant way to put it. The introduction of the Davidic monarchy is a structural control mechanism designed to stabilize the human player's strategy. It is about creating a buffer of leadership to prevent the systemic collapse we see in Psalm 79.
Psalm 79 is the worst-case scenario. The Nash equilibrium has broken down, the defense shield has been withdrawn, and the external adversaries have completely overrun the system. The temple is defiled, and the nation is a laughingstock to its neighbors. In that scenario, the human player has zero leverage. How do they justify their appeal for help?
They appeal to the sovereign's brand equity. In the text, they cry out, "Help us, for the glory of your name. Deliver us, and forgive our sins, for your name's sake." They are essentially arguing that if the sovereign allows them to be completely destroyed, It will damage the sovereign's global reputation. The external nations will say, "Where is their God?" It is a highly sophisticated rhetorical strategy. When you have no physical power, you leverage the reputational risk of your patron.
It is a desperate but mathematically sound argument in the context of their relationship. If the patron's mission is to be known globally as the supreme authority, allowing their client state to be permanently erased defeats that mission.
Yes, it brings us back to the most analysis. The mission is global recognition of sovereign authority. The objective is a secure, loyal covenant community. The strategy is historical education and moral discipline. And the tactics are the laws, the rituals, and the occasional military interventions. When the tactics fail, the strategy must adapt, but the mission remains constant.
It is incredible how these ancient texts, which are often read purely through a lens of personal faith, contain such a sophisticated understanding of systemic risk, institutional memory, and strategic interaction.
It shows that human nature and the dynamics of power, loyalty, and crisis management haven't changed in 3,000 years. Whether you are managing an ancient kingdom, a modern corporation, or a global alliance, the rules of engagement, communication, and strategic alignment remain exactly the same.
If you don't manage your resources, if you forget your history, and if you fail to align your short-term decisions with your long-term mission, the system will fail. The only question is whether you have the resilience to analyze the failure, adapt, and rebuild. Thank you for joining us on this strategic journey through the archives. Until next time, keep analyzing, keep questioning, and stay strategic.